So I thought it might be interesting, hopefully interesting anyway, to go through some of the more unusual or rare or just really old and interesting tools that I have and that I use routinely. These will be familiar to some of you and perhaps not to others of you. So yeah, in no particular order, I have a couple of power tools that are not super common use, that I use a lot. This is Makita's take on what they refer to as a compassing power plane. So it's a curved-based plane. It's not a true compassing plane in that you can't reverse the saw on this. There's a company out of Spain called Veto that does one that can go either way, but it's much more lightly built and it only takes carbide blades, which my experience has been that the carbide planer blades on the really hard woods like Angelique and live oak and things like that, the carbide blades, if they hit a knot or any kind of change in density, they tend to shatter. So I wanted one that could take the high-speed steel blades that were resharpenable and that don't shatter. And honestly, you mostly need this profile and not the reverse profile in boat work. You can do the outside of a curved surface with a normal flat-soled plane or planer without too much difficulty. It's this one that's important. And similarly, this is the turbo plane from ArborTech, which is a really nice one for doing similar things but freehand. So really great for freehand shaping. You can get pretty deep and pretty creative with this. I've been using stuff from them for many years now, and it works great. And actually, a friend discovered that, contrary to popular belief, you can actually resharpen these. This is carbide, but if you have the little diamond thing for doing carbide, you can actually resharpen these, which is quite nice. So there's this one. They also do one that cuts a little circular profile on edge, and I have that as well, and I use it, but I do not use it nearly as much as I use this one. This one's, there's no, it doesn't grab and try and take off into the piece. It's much more controllable and safer to use. And it's shaping on the face as well, which is easier to see and easier to control. So yeah, there's those things. This one I put out just, this is one of my many framing chisels. So the big chisels that typically a framing chisel has what's called a strike hoop. I'm sure there are other names for it as well, because you're going to be whacking on this long enough and hard enough that if you didn't have that, the handle would split apart. They're almost always socketed tangs, and this one is from BD Hathaway, as you can see, which is a very old maker's mark out of New Bedford, Massachusetts. So this, according to the guy I got it from, at least he had a bunch of historical information about Hathaway and the forge that this was made in, and this is from somewhere between 1830 and 1850, and it's still got a lot of steel in it. Cuts beautifully. I put an edge on it the day after I got it and started using it straight away, and I just really enjoy things like that. And there's a couple more, but firstly, this I have a feeling is going to be the most unusual thing to the largest group of people. This is what's referred to as a beam tensioner, from the Hazet, or Hazet, it's German anyway. I don't know how you say it, but they make these really for the timber framing industry, if you can call it an industry anymore. But the idea is that if you if you have softwood, you can actually just drive these claws into the two pieces that you want to pull together, just with a mallet. With these hardwoods that I'm using, you need to drill a pilot hole for it to go into. But basically, you tap that in, you tap the other one in, and then through the double screw and the ratchet action, you can pull things together. I've pulled like really big, heavy pieces together with this, and it does not mind. For instance, you can see here, I've plugged the holes now, but these two holes were the holes that I used to pull the two pieces of the keel together when I was assembling the keel scarf. So it's a little bit spendy, but it's really nice. When you need it, you need, like, you can always set something up with a come along or with clamps or things like that, but it's always a little bit jerry-rigged, and you risk the thing coming apart part way pulled together and flying apart, that sort of thing. And this is very nice. I also have here this. God, I'm okay. Number 164. I was trying to remember what model this actually was. This is one of Lee Nielsen's planes, and this is I think they refer to this as a low angle smoother. So I guess it's essentially, it's a low angle bench plane, which is not revolutionary in any way, but this is very, very nice. And just one. I don't have it in there now, but particularly in conjunction with this toothed blade that they make. So you see that there? It is absolutely fantastic for working like heavily figured hardwoods, things with really difficult grain, and end grain. Of course, this is actually the only hand tool, apart from a very sharp chisel or slick or whatever, that happily works end grain live oak, is this toothed iron on this low angle plane. So that has been huge in doing particularly the joinery for the centerline assembly, which is a mix of live oak and angelique, all of which is a pain to work with most tools. So that's definitely been great for that. Next I have, this is actually a dedicated rip saw, a Japanese style dedicated rip saw. These are not super common. You get the ones, the what are they called? Ryoba, I think. The ones that have a cross-cut teeth on one side and they have rip teeth on the other side. But what I was finding with the amount of kerfing joints, which is really what I use this for, that I was doing with my double-sided one, was I was actually knocking the set out of the teeth on the crosscut side, because I'm running it between these two big bits of wood, and it's like the rip side doesn't have a lot of set to it, but the crosscut comparatively it has a bit more. I mean, they design it so that, in normal use, whatever that is, I don't know what that is. In normal use, you shouldn't have to worry about losing the set out of the crosscut ones, but this is not normal use. So this comes in really handy. Right, I'm using it like right now actually for kerfing in between planks that go on. So any place where it's, say it's open here and it's open here, but it's touching here, but there's enough room that I can get a saw in. It's really nice because it gives you exactly the bevel that it should be. You can't obviously kerf the whole plank because there are frames in the way. That would not go very well for me. But it picks up the points that need to be planed the next time you take the plank off the boat. You see the little saw marks, and you see the beginnings of the right bevel, or the right profile, like kind of emerging there, and then you can use that to plane from and kind of tidy it up. This is more for a general carpenter doing ripping tasks. What I would really like is if the small teeth were on this end and the big teeth were on this end, because for kerfing things, it's really hard to get it started on the big teeth. You want the little teeth to get it started, but you can only get it in that far, you know. But I believe that, like, if you are in Japan and you're like, you actually know where to go, you can get a boat builder. So there's all different kinds, and I know about this a little bit from hanging out with Douglas Brooks, who is the authority on such things. I also have, this is actually my my newest thing. This is a gift from a good friend of mine. This is a Collins unlipped Shipwright's Adze. There are, well, I never intended to start an Adze collection. It just kind of happened. But I have found through using a bunch of many different styles, types and styles, that I prefer an unlipped cutting edge to a lipped one. Personally, I know a lot of people, especially in North America, like really prefer the lipped kind, but I really like this. So, thanks, Chris. Nextly, I have this. This is, as far as I can tell, referred to as a ship's carpenter's axe. So it's related to a mast axe, but the blade is a little, like, the cutting surface is a little wider, and the blade is a little shorter. And I really, really like this one. This was also a gift, actually. This is from an old friend of mine up in Plymouth, Massachusetts. He, as I recall, he found this in the back of his barn, and it was a rust ball at that point, but with some help from some friends, got it cleaned up, got an edge on it, and honestly, like, I don't know, the only thing I can make out on this is part of a name, which I don't know if it's a maker's mark or if it's an owner's name. There's a something Dunton, and then I think it says Massachusetts, MASS, Massachusetts, but that's really all you can make out. So I don't know a lot about it, but the steel, whatever steel is in this thing, is absolutely fantastic. I hardly ever have to sharpen this, and honestly, when I was working on Mayflower 2, my friend Chris and we used this axe for doing the rough shaping of pretty much the whole stem assembly of Mayflower 2, which is an enormous assembly, mostly live oak, and the rest is white oak. And they're large enough timbers that in order to shape them, you have to lay out your pattern on the piece, and then you make a bunch of cuts, typically with a chainsaw these days, down to your lines, and then basically cut all the kerfs out with an axe. Because you do, like, with white oak, you can usually do that with a hammer, because white oak splits, or rather, like, rives, I should say, well enough that just hitting it with a hammer will actually separate all of those pieces. But the live oak does not. So we had to break out the big guns. I think I've sharpened this maybe 3 or 4 times since I've owned it, and it's gone through a lot. So then, lastly, for edge tools, at least, I have I have a number of slicks. This is called Slick, if you're not familiar with it. It's a wonderful edge tool for a lot of very specific things. It's not an everyday tool by any means, but when those situations come up where you're trying to get back like into the back of a scarf, you know, like a hooked scarf or anything like that you're doing, like this is absolutely the way to go. And this one is my favorite. It's very, very old. This is actually made by D.R. Barton out of Rochester, New York, which is the closest thing I have to a hometown. So it's kind of, I don't know, kind of cool, I think. He used to have a blacksmith shop up on the rim of High Falls in Rochester, and this was definitely made in that shop. This was, I think, made somewhere between 1850 and 1860. This is actually a millwright's slick, is the type. It's, you know, it's got a very long iron and then steel part to it, because millwright, it has to actually get inside pieces of, like, I don't fully understand this, but I think like parts of like lantern gears and things that actually the gearing, the wooden gearing for water powered mills, these were particularly for doing that. But what I really like about it is actually that it's really heavy. It's relatively narrow but quite heavy, so any situation that I'm wanting to pair something that is below me, like to any degree below me, you get this thing going downhill, and it has a lot of cutting power just by itself without really pushing it very hard. So not for overhead use. You will get tired very quickly. I have a different one for that, but for what it's for, it's really, really great. And then the last thing I got out here is obviously everyone knows about clamps. I don't pretend that there's anything novel about that, but the really like massive heavy duty ones are pretty hard to get now. There are not really any companies making the really heavy duty ones anymore. This is, I think, from the Connecticut Clamp Company. Yeah, they made these crazy trussed ones, but also like the I'm sure there's a term for this, whether it's backbone or some sort of bar or whatever. The spine of this thing is 3/8 of an inch thick steel. It's very heavy, but like in order to coax flat pieces of wood to make some of the shapes in a boat like Rosalind, this is the kind of clamp that you need. So I get clamps on eBay a lot. These sorts of things come up on eBay. They come up in antique stores sometimes. I got one at a yard sale one time, just like a random massive clamp. But particularly like clamps with this deep of a reach. This is a that's like a 9 3/4 inch throat on that, which I think Bessie still makes one that's about that, but they're hideously expensive, and they're not actually as well built as these ones. So that's kind of what I go to, mostly eBay for those. And then lastly, I thought I'd just have a look at my my tool bag for some of my other, everyday stuff, things that I use a lot. This is a wonderful tool bag. So this is actually a prototype, which was given to me very, very kindly for sort of rigorous product testing by Roger over at Veto Pro Pack. If you're not familiar with his workspace organization and bags and tool cases and all that sort of thing, you should definitely check it out. Everything that his company makes is very well thought out, very well produced, and honestly, this thing has gotten me more organized, I think, on a daily, like an average daily basis than I think I've ever been. So, thank you again, Roger. And yeah, I mean, there's nothing really surprising about this. I got bevel gauge, I got some measuring tools, I got punches for backing out bolts that didn't work out. I've got a lot of chisels, different kinds of chisels, Japanese saws. But like, as you can see, this bag actually like keeps things organized such that I can still see all of these crazy shaped, awkward to store things, which is really, really nice. So yeah, that's, I think, about it really. Obviously there are a lot more tools and a lot more jigs and widgets and things that go into all of this, but that's kind of a highlight, I suppose. I sort of think anyway. Yeah. Thanks for watching. Yeah, now, oh, why am I bad at word talk? Word output. So bad.
You're not
Alright.
that.
Yeah. Okay. And then lastly, for edge tools anyway, I have a number of slicks, and they do not